is really it's hard to focus and hard to do anything when there's so many technical problems. But anyway, we've established a scene. We have a picture of the female protagonist and a picture of the antagonist here. I'll just read a little bit about later. Now, this is all the prologue, remember. This is not chapter 1, it's the prologue. And this is something that I think is interesting that I do here. He invites her to please have one drink with him at the bar. And the bar is just across the way from the cafe. This is New Year's Eve. She's moving, she has nothing to do. She is trying to trust men more. He just gives her roses, and he pays her for the meal, and he says he doesn't have anything small or anything else. He gives her a $50 bill. So, she's okay, this is a nice guy. He's too hapless to do anything. She describes him how endearing, he's very feckless. Oh, good. Hi there, Jerry. Can you hear us? Can you unmute yourself? Jerry? Are you able to unmute yourself?
Sure.
Okay, great. Thank you. So we just had
to say anything.
Okay, we had the beginning of the scene. And so she goes across to the bar with him for one drink. So notice what's going on here in this passage. I'll read a somewhat longer passage. This is really strong champagne, Susan said. Thank you, but I really should be going. Tat was pouring more champagne. Tat is the name of the other guy. She seemed to be in a moving car, and it was hard to see through the glass. The party had gotten smaller. The bartender had disappeared. It's those cheddar cheese fish, a man's voice said slowly. They make everything taste weird. She could almost see the fish dissolving as they swam. A big silver ball moved slowly down a spike high above Times Square, where she first thought it was raining because everything looked blurry. Then she realized she was standing still, but moving. She was moving through time as if in a parade. People were lining the streets. They were cheering, but they didn't make a sound. She was in the elevator. The operator was out of uniform and out of focus. His wrists stuck out. There was a fireplace in the upper room they reached. There was wood in the fireplace, and the wood was already burning. How had that happened? There was a mattress on the floor. Did she need to use the bathroom? No, she could hold it. She sat on the mattress. Exhaustion washed over her like a wave. They were at war. They were in a bunker. She'd been in a bunker her whole life. Someone would have to pay. Where was her purse? There it was. There were pillows everywhere, like clouds shot out of the sky. Someone was tugging off her clothing. She was a child again. It was time for the whispering and closets with coats overhead. She needed to do what she shouldn't because she had to. Still in the middle of pillows, there was something waiting, something like terror. And the terror was like lightning. And by the light of the lightning, she could see she was naked and she was the only one. The switch confused her. She wondered about the champagne. There had been salty champagne. No wonder she was thirsty. A voice said, "Lie down on the wood." She was in a boat now, sailing out to sea. She was not in control. No one was in control. The water knew what it was doing. The boat was sinking. Salt water was pouring in, flooding her. There was no room for anything personal. Wingless angels were dancing on pins and needles, sharp, sharp. A country had its legs open, forced into yawning. Someone was bent. Fingers were scrabbling in hair she didn't have. A plane high overhead droned like a voice. It was noise. It meant nothing. It would feel good. What would happen would not hurt, though birds dangled from the sky like coats. Back and front, dry fans whirring, helicopters on their way. Somewhere there was a desk she needed to get under. There it was, a plastic nightstick poked its head between metal teeth. She was alone in a house at night. Men were at the back door, and she ran with the children to the kitchen, and they pushed back, all of them, pushed against the door, digging in their heels, and even as they felt the door give way behind them, they heard the front door open. If there was someone in charge, it wasn't someone you could reach. When it came to it, you had to let go, forgetting what came next. Small animals ran for cover on a stubbled field. It was open season in a storm. There were shots. Animals were pushing at her, hard nosings over and over. They would bite her if she didn't play dead. The animals were blind and wet, and teeth and fur and hands and mouths and things too fierce to mention. If they bit her, she would not feel it. She would not feel it. The animals had gone. There was just a bristling field where storms happened. There was an eye that closed. And the animals pushed back, coming at the tree from hot, stinking, dry, muddy front, back, double entrances in trouble of earth, stabbed by forked tongues and lightning, and pain rounded Spain and ran zigzag in all the dark directions, anywhere it wanted, anywhere at all. Pain, 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 pain. So that's the end of that prologue. So, can somebody say something about that? What's your sense of that? What's going to mean? Give me a
It's
moment.
very powerful.
Yeah. What do you think is happening or happened?
I think she's reliving her childhood trauma or
Okay.
traumas.
Right. And she's reliving them. What is going on in the present, do we think? So what I'm trying to do here is to move from, so what about the champagne? We have a sense of the champagne. Why does that figure in here? The salty champagne.
Because if there was some kind of poisoning.
Yeah, is a drug. And we'll know more about this as the novel goes on, but there's a drug, GHB, and known as G. Anyway, it's the date rape drug.
Oh, for her to be dead.
For her to be what?
Well, for her to be, whatever that drug is,
Right.
is putting her in another state
Right,
of mind.
right.
So that's where, then that brought on all these other experiences that were described.
Okay.
That were, but they're also mixed up and confused in many ways that it sounds like a dream to me, just a really terrible dream.
Okay, so it sounds like a dream. That's good. And I just wondered, do you have a sense? So she had this drug in the champagne, and then do you have a sense what really happened? What's really happening? Or is it just like then she went home and had a terrible dream? Or
No,
You know,
she's
Sorry?
taken her someplace.
Raped.
yes. So but I'm not sure if every reader, I mean, it's meant to be kind of hovering there between, it could be just a dream and a trauma, like Cordy said, and experiencing that, but there are things that sort of make you wonder, like elevator, like she's in an elevator.
The fireplace and the mattress.
Yeah, and that turns out to be a painting, not
Interesting.
not a real fireplace. But anyway, but she can't distinguish between reality, past, present, and so the chapter 1, that's the prologue, and it ends with that pain, pain, pain. And then the prologue starts, and the prologue was called The Thing That Happened. So that's another thing, that's encouragement to understand that something is happening in real time in the present, in addition to all the memories and so forth. But what I think is, what I was trying to do here, and you can see when you read it, is to go from, this is strong, really strong champagne, Susan said. So she's beginning to feel the effects, but she's still completely, fully conscious, right? She's still making sense. And then, thank you, but I really should be going. Tack pouring more champagne. She seemed to be in a moving car. Okay, so then we're edging into, the drug and not being in reality. Was hard to see through the glass. The party had gotten smaller. That could be either reality or the drug. And then the bartender disappeared. So it's an attempt to move from reality to being under the influence of the drug without taking a break. So then chapter 1 is called Riding a Strange Horse. And one of the things I think is interesting, I'm speaking as a reader now, is that the prologue is The Thing That Happened, and the rest of the chapters have all animals in the titles. It's all animals. And the other thing, the chapter begins, I stood, pulling myself up on a beam of sunlight, using it like a handrail. There was a door in my head, and someone was trying to knock it down. Bam, bam, bam. I hurt. I was wearing my gold uniform top, but I had buttoned it wrong. I left rebuttoning for later. The misbuttoning went with the jeans being too long. I rolled them up and up. I had big flannel cuffs now. The flannel was red with big whiplashes of green and black across it. It looked hot and cold at once. I needed to get home. Where was my skirt? They made you pay for the uniforms. There was a $50 bill face up on the floor beside a small black cloth purse. I hurt at the root of me. I checked. The purse was mine. I recognized my picture on the driver's license. I was squinting. I tried to put the $50 in the purse. It must have fallen out. Money belonged in a purse. I belonged at home, in a place I wasn't living anymore. The purse didn't want to open, but I made it. I put the money where it was safe. The purse didn't want to close, but it did. What had happened? No, that way was blocked. How had I gotten here? That could be figured out. I worked at the hotel, but employees weren't supposed to go up to guest rooms. I could be fired. I didn't need the job, but it wasn't like me to go directly against the rules. But there had been a man, champagne. I heard my mother's voice. Don't look back, she was saying. People who look back turn to pillars of salt. I was a woman unencumbered by a past. Last night was as far from me as the dark side of the moon. It was safer that way. Forgive and forget, Mother had instructed me, but all you had to do was forget, and the forgiveness took care of itself. So, so for one thing, do you notice something? So between the prologue and the first chapter, I do something that I don't think anybody's ever done. At least I've never read a book that did this. So in the end, it's like she would not feel it. She would not feel it. Okay. And then the first chapter is I stood, pulling myself up. You see what's happened?
Yeah.
Lorene?
You switch from the third person to the first person.
Right. So the prologue is all in the third person, and then it shifts to the first person. And you know it's the same person because of the circumstances, the purse and the shirt and everything like that. And anybody want to guess, why, why that might be an idea to do? What changes? Well, so when you think of the third, what's the difference between the third person and the first person? So, we know what it means physically, it says she and he,
First person takes responsibility.
right?
The
The
third
first person you take on, the first person may very well be, you may have an unreliable narrator, which Susan is. But if you have the she and he, I wanted it to be, if I had I in the prologue, the reader might, especially given Susan's mind, might think that this whole thing was invented. Or that the man hadn't ever given her flowers, or you wouldn't know the whole circumstances because it would all be through her mind. So I felt that I needed to have the third person to start off the book. So you knew what happened, the thing that happened. This is what happened. This is me, the author, telling you this is what happened. But then starting the first chapter, we're in I. So in a way, there's this term called the anagnoresis, but it's the theological term of Jesus when he came to earth, that he lost the consciousness of being part of God. He couldn't have the remembrance, he couldn't remember, he couldn't have the realization that he was divine, because then he wouldn't be fully man. And so what if he dies? Or so, he had to be fully man. So he shed. He was still God and everything according to the doctrine, but he shed the knowledge of that. And so what happens here is she sheds that knowledge for the moment of what's happened. Because of her childhood and the mother saying, don't look back. And those who look back turn to pillars of salt. And there's an interesting thing here. As I was reading this again, I realized how steeped I am in the Bible. So you have, I'm not particularly religious or whatever, but, I had years of going to Sunday school and so on. In fact, I was remembering when I was a kid and I was in Sunday school and we were reading the Bible and about circumcision. And we read this, and then the teacher had to leave the room. And so the other was mostly girls, and they said to me, do you know what circumcision means? And I said, no. And they said, well, why don't you ask him? Why don't you ask the teacher? And I said, well, I wasn't completely dumb. I said, why don't you ask him? And they said, no, because you're the smart one. You're the teacher's pet. You know all these things, and he'll, he wants to. I fell for it completely. So when he came back, I asked him. I didn't know, and I said, I probably was the only one in the room who didn't know. And I said, what does circumcision mean? And then all the kids laughed. And so he must have thought that this is a big prank. Anyway, he took the King James Bible and hit me over the head with it.
Oh.
And it was a formative experience. It was a direct experience of the biblical word. Anyway, I see here that I'm very steeped in this. So you have the wine and putting new wine in the wineskins, or new salt in the old salt shelf. And here there's a lot of biblical stuff that comes out just sort of below the surface. And one of these is this idea of anagnoresis, of shedding knowledge. So I want to I'm going to skip now. I'm not going to go more into the plot and everything, but there's
Can I ask you a question, please?
Please.
In your mind, this is fiction, of course. In your mind, are you making a distinction between shedding a kind of higher knowledge that comes down from above and not going backwards and lifting repression?
Wow, that's a really complicated question. Very, very good question. In my mind, I suppose, well, first of all, I think as a now talking about analyzing the novel, it doesn't really matter what I think, because for me, the writer, as a creator, and the writer afterwards trying to analyze and explain what they've written are very, very different. And I bridle at the idea of intention being much of a my intention doesn't matter very much to me. So, but in terms of this, I'd say with human beings, this is me as a thinker now, not the writer, that the higher knowledge is, in a sense, the past knowledge. There's not a difference, because if you don't know, it's like what saying that those who are ignorant of history are doomed to repeat it. So you have here a good example that she is ignorant of her own personal history. And so in a way, she's doomed, or she's set up to repeat it. And I think that the higher knowledge that Jesus lost, in a way, as human beings, I think our past is our future. Or I, think that the mother gave her completely the wrong advice. If you tell somebody, don't look back, I think, then how are you going to look forward if you don't look back? If you don't understand where you've been and what you're going through, then you don't know who you are, and then you don't know what's going to happen either. So it's the only knowledge we have, really. We have the knowledge of our past, and we can confront that and look at that and analyze it. I mean, that's what therapy is all about. That's also what memory is all about. Fran, can you do something, Fran? Can you settle down?
I'm trying to.
It's distracting.
Oh, okay. I could shut me off for a minute. I'm all right.
This is fine. This is fine.
Okay. All right. I was just trying to find a better place. I can. Okay.
Okay. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, I agree with what you said, actually. Stepping back and being on the outside and looking at it, that
Right.
the higher knowledge and the repressed past come together somehow.
Right.
They have to link, they have to fuse.
Right.
And by the way, I want to place you in a great tradition just for a moment, okay? And this is for everybody else who's interested. In the recent New Yorker, there is a short critical essay on William Faulkner, a new book that has come out. And Faulkner is all about the past becoming the present, becoming the future. And what this author is saying, that Faulkner's most profound contribution was that lifting the past, going into the past, causes the past to keep repeating itself. And this is at a personal level. His character, Quentin Compson, for example, does that. And that this process created some of the greatest literature America, or for that matter, Europe has. This process of invading the past invades you in return, the past keeps repeating itself, the past becomes the present that you live in. All of that, Faulkner caused that deliberate confusion in a way that I think you're causing a similar deliberate, not just confusion, but fusion.
Yeah, I think that's great. I really appreciate that. I want to say two things about that. One is that here I agree with your interpretation of Faulkner, and it certainly is. They asked me in an interview, and I have the interview here, and one question was books, authors and books that have influenced your writings. And I said, I don't know who has influenced my prose. I would love to say Faulkner, but I'm not sure that's true. So I'm really glad you, because I think he was very formative. But I think it's very different. What I'm trying to do is to say that since we can't help but be an expression of the past, to face it actually is our only way of freeing ourselves from it. I think Faulkner is, as you just said, more his emphasis is to go back, and people by going back create, they just go back and go back and go back. And what I'm trying to say is that here's a person where she starts off, she says, I'm a person unencumbered by a past. That's a tragic mistake to make about yourself. Nobody is unencumbered by their past, in my view. And the only thing you can do is to kind of sort it out. So that's what she does. But anyway, I'd like to switch to a thing about character. This is a character that Lorene called the knight in shining armor. And I have a wonderful story to tell about this, but this comes in the first chapter. She's there on the sidewalk and she's trying to hail a cab. It wasn't a cab though, it said Ann Arbor Police Department on the side. The police car stopped. The driver got out and came around the front of the car. He stood looking at me, not unkindly. He was dressed in blue. Maybe that was to match his eyes, which were bluer than other blues. In a world where delivery boys look like doctors, what did policemen look like? Was he really a policeman? He was carrying a gun. Guns were another way people tried to avoid bad luck. Maybe it was wrong to try too hard to avoid bad luck. Maybe when you did that, the luck got worse. Guns were scary, but the policeman seemed nice. There had been a nice policeman when I was young. He put handcuffs on all of us and laughed when we slid our hands out. There's no catching you, small fry, he'd say to us. I'm going to have to throw you back. And that's a strictly autobiographical memory of mine. There was such a policeman. He was great. He would stop and he would put these handcuffs, and we just thought it was great that he put it, and we just slide our hand right out because we're so small. And then he would say this, I'm going to have to throw you back. So that's a little bit of autobiography that comes in there. You're a policeman, aren't you? I said. My voice wasn't slurry at all, more like fuzzy. Fuzzy Wuzzy was a bear. Yes, the man said, I'm Officer Ferrier of the Ann Arbor Police Department. Are you all right? His voice was odd, full of starts and stops, like one of those tapes that people make to speed up and slow down because it's funny and different. He handed me a stiff little piece of paper. Are you giving me a ticket? I asked, too smart to answer his question directly. I thought you were a cab. I didn't see your uniform at first through the glass. Officer Ferrier of the Ann Arbor Police Department smiled. He had the mixed up hair that people called salt and pepper. His face was bulldog saggy, but when he smiled, he looked nice. He had wonderful eyes, bluer than sea or sky or anything I could think of that was blue. He looked like someone you could go home with safely. Not that I was any judge. So that's Officer Ferrier, and he's modeled after a guy who was really helpful to me when I was researching the book in Ann Arbor. And he gave unstintingly of his time, and I wasn't very well known. Now, I'm fairly well known as a writer, so maybe you could understand someone cooperating with me, but I was pretty unknown. And this is like in the 90s, and he told me everything. He went over about rape kits and fingerprint identification and all the details, and just on, and was so kind. And I modeled this character after him. I kept the last name, which I thought was nice. Farrier, is an iron worker, but also somebody who, at least in the sound, somebody who carries you, somebody who ferries you. And so when I changed the first name to be Adam for, again, biblical stuff. So when the book was published, I was all excited. One of the things I wanted to do was to let the real Adam Ferrier, the book is dedicated to three guys, and one of them is the real Adam Ferrier. So then I thought, but it's been 30 years since this guy and I talked. And I remembered that one of the things he told me about his life was that he worked on the Jeffrey Dahmer case.
Oh, yeah.
And he was one of the first people in Jeffrey Dahmer's apartment. And he said to me, I opened the freezer and I saw things people should never have to see. And that stayed with me forever. So I thought, okay, so I looked up Jeffrey Dahmer and Ferrier on the internet, and I found Captain James Ferrier, who provided the photos for the Jeffrey Dahmer case. So I called, I looked at the Milwaukee Police Department brochures, and his name was in the 96 brochure, but not in the 97 brochure. So then I called up the PR person and I said, I'm looking for James Ferrier. It's a wonderful police officer. And I think he retired in 96 or 97. Anyway, he's in one book and not the other. So the guy said, I'll see what I can do. And then just 2 days ago, I got these two wonderful emails. One was from the PR guy and he said, I found Jim Ferrier and I gave him your email and your phone number, which I had asked him to do. And the next was from Jim Ferrier himself, giving me his phone number and his email address. So I called him right away and I told him, and he's since lost his right leg. And he's, you know, he gets around with either he has a prosthetic limb, he has a walker, and he has a wheelchair. And his life sounds fairly bleak, but he seems fairly resourceful in dealing with it. Anyway, he seemed fairly down when we started talking. And he didn't really even remember, you know, I mean, for me, it's been this great thing, but he, you know, sort of remembered a conversation. I said, well, you know, you're the hero of this novel. People call you the knight in shining armor, and you're, and the description matches him, matches the way I thought of him and all his information. So he seemed really happy to get this.
Nice. That's lovely.
Yeah. I want to say one thing. When Donald was talking about repressed memories and so forth, and one of the mistakes I made in marketing the book, and I think it was a serious one, I asked Lori Rubin and Lorene Nussbaum, our resident authors, to write blurbs for the book, and they were both very kind and did so. Lorene is one of the best readers you could ever hope for. She reads at a lightning pace and catches every mistake.
That's good. That's a slow reader. That helps.
Just terrific. Anyway, so I asked them to do it, and then they did, and I put the blurbs. I thought I would have one more round of looking at the book. I thought that, first of all, I thought that the publisher would be responsible and get me people to review the book and blurbs and everything, and they don't do that. This is a midway publisher. It's called a hybrid publisher. Anyway, I won't go into that, but they didn't do any of that. So I had to put it together. And I thought that I was supposed to get one more time of seeing the manuscript and signing a release. I hadn't signed any release to publish, and the book arrived. So that was a shock. It just, you know, showed up in the front desk. And they had incorporated the typesetter had incorporated every edit that I made, luckily, and only made one mistake that I could find out, which is the last lines of the book, the last 2 lines of the book, interestingly enough. But anyway, and it's not an important one. But one thing they hadn't done was to let me think about the order that I would put blurbs into and go over the blurbs one last time. And Lori's blurb, therefore, was the first blurb that when you open the book, that's the first thing you see. And then on Amazon and everything. And I misquoted her, or this was an early version. I said that she was an expert in PTSD. And that's not true. Her expertise is on sexually repressed memory. And those letters, PTSD, being the first thing that people hit when they look at the blurbs, I think it was a big mistake. It makes it sound a lot grimmer. You don't get the idea. I mean, sexually repressed memory sounds a lot more sexy than PTSD. So I think I've had some people say that, you know, they don't want to read the book because it's about PTSD. And that was a serious marketing mistake that I made. Anyway, so we're almost at an hour. I'm sorry we had all the confusion at the beginning, and I'm glad that people signed on. Any questions that you have, or ideas that you have, responses you have?
Well, I think I mentioned it, Lynn. I don't know. I am a little unhappy about the end. I think I mentioned it. That Susan is originally worried about the man who raped her being at large, and he might rape again. And she feels that he should be found out and he should be punished, put in jail, whatever. you forget about that in the end, and you just have a worry about him coming after her to have rights to the baby. And I think that drives, that doesn't, that's my only major criticism, really.
Okay, well, I mean, that's great if that's the only one. I think my reason for doing that is that, so, I mean, that's kind of a spoiler there, Lorene, but anyway, so if Susan has a baby and her concern is, I mean, this is giving away the whole thing, but anyway.
Everybody have read it by now?
No, I don't, has anybody read it beside Lorene? No.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought that all these people were knowledgeable.
No, no. Anyway, so now you have the spoiler, but I'm not going to answer that question really, but I think I can tell you about it privately because I never really focused on that. So let's have another discussion when everybody's read the book.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. So what about questions that people have who haven't read, or how about some good thing about the book, Lorene?
When is Amazon going to deliver mine?
Oh, I don't know.
Maybe today.
I don't have any books myself. This is very frustrating to me. I can't send Officer Ferrier a book because I ordered, I have my own author copy and I had 2 copies for Lorene and Lori, and that's it. And so hopefully soon. When did you order it, Don?
3 or 4 days ago.
Yeah.
The Prime is slower because of COVID.
Yeah.
It's not a books are no longer the priority in
Right.
Prime.
No.
Anything personal COVID related is.
Okay, so let me ask myself some questions. Let me give you a few questions and you tell me what you'd like me to answer. We'll do this a couple times.
So I have a question, actually.
Okay, great.
So I got in rather late, but I could tell from what you were saying and people's reaction that you are really talking, or the novel is in a way inside this woman's head. How do you invite the reader to get into that system?
Well, I mean, I'm not sure I understand the question. Like in the beginning, we're inside her head. We start outside her head, but there's, like the comment, like in the very first, I mean, there's a whole novel fiction theory about narrators and unreliable narrators, reliable narrators. There's something called omniscient point of view, where the author knows everything. They know everything the character is thinking and feeling, and everything that everybody else is doing. This is something Dickens used to use. So you can go into any character's head anytime you want, and you can be outside too. That's generally thought to be kind of old-fashioned now. People, it's godlike. The novelist used to be a god. Like, I'll tell you what Jerry is thinking and feeling, and then I'll tell you what Fran is thinking and feeling. And this is absolutely to be trusted. We don't believe that anymore. There's sort of the God point of view has gone. So then there's limited omniscience, which is often used, or no omniscience at all, like, I don't know, ignorance. So limited omniscience is this is what I'm using here. I know what Susan is thinking and feeling, and nobody else. And I do that, like in this thing we talked about in the second paragraph. The first thing we have of Susan's thought is, Susan was putting new salt in old shakers. That's just reporting, right?
Yep.
Since childhood, there had never been anything she really wanted. There was something wrong with that, she thought. So our first moment of connecting with Susan, first we see what she's doing, and then we have this history that she's thinking boy, I've never wanted anything. And then she's thinking there's something wrong with that. Now it's interesting to me. I mean, I love it that when you write something, where it comes from, I don't know. But when you go back, you see all these things. So there was something wrong with that. She thought she thinks there's something wrong with her not wanting anything. But we see that there's something wrong with her thinking that there was something wrong with that, meaning, she means it as this is unfortunate or this is a limitation. We mean that's wrong with your theory is wrong. There is something wrong with it. Namely, you wanted things from your childhood like everybody else. So, and I don't know. So in the chapters that go on, it's in her, like in the scene with the policeman, I thought you were a doctor, I admitted. You're dressed in white and this is with the pizza guy. Pizza guy shows up at the hotel room right away. I thought you were a doctor, I admitted. You're dressed in white and you said you were here for a delivery. So we get her that this is what so what I admitted, I could say, I thought you were a doctor, I lied. Right, and then we know that she's not thinking that. So I don't know. I think that this is how we generally go through life as limited omniscient. We think of ourselves as limited omniscient. So I don't know what you're thinking and feeling, but I think that I know what I'm thinking and feeling.
Is that called limited? If you think you know?
Well, no, that's not where the limitation comes in. The limitation comes in that it's only in one person's consciousness.
Oh, okay.
But for example, if I just took what you said, she sees this person in white who's come to make a delivery, and she thinks he might be a doctor. I would immediately think, lady, you're really delusional.
Right. Well, remember, she's just been drugged and raped.
She's still under the influence.
This is right the next morning. This is right after in the chapter. And she's still, so it's interesting to me, if I were a reviewer, one of the things I would like to do is to go and take her fully conscious and sober and not under any influence in the very beginning and watch as she progresses to being completely
that might be helpful for someone like me who would, I've got to get into that framework.
Right. But then
I've got to make sure that I'm getting into the framework of somebody who's under the influence of drugs and not just nuts.
Well, that's what you missed with the champagne and the something in the bar.
Prologue.
Right. Yeah. And then what's interesting to me is she comes out of it. So she comes out of and she's still, it's like trying to talk about somebody who has a hangover or, I mean, she's getting back to herself, but she's still not there. It takes a while to get rid of the influence of these things. And so there's this strange,
back and forth.
I think it would be interesting to a psychologist to track becoming drug. And I used, when I was, older than I'd like to admit, I was, I used a lot of different drugs and LSD and cocaine and so forth. And I did some writing under the influence of those drugs. And I feel like I can put myself into the head of somebody who's drugged.
Yes, I read some of the stuff you wrote that way, Lyn, and I thought it was terrific.
Great. I'm revealing more than I know I'm revealing. Okay. Well, anyway, it's 11:30, and I really appreciate I'm sorry that the instructions weren't clear, and maybe we can cut off the beginning of this a little bit and start later, but I think I appreciate it very much, and I hope you can just put Lyn Coffin in the Amazon search bar, and then you can buy it on Amazon as a paperback, or you can go to Adelaide Books and buy it as an ebook or a paperback. If you buy it on Adelaide Books and you put in author's guest in the discount code, you get a 15% discount. So you heard it here. Anyway, thanks very much, and I'll see you at the front desk or something.
Around.
Well, thank you, Lyn.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Lyn.
I had a lot more thoughts, but I guess we can talk about them next time.
Okay, why don't you give us one thought?
That after she came out of the drugs, or was on her way to more sanity, the next chapter was like a third person. You were calling it a semi-omniscient voice, or semi-omniscient factor in how she was feeling. She had some awareness of what was happening, but it was very slow.
No,
So-
actually, so I'm sorry if I was confusing. We can talk as much as you want because they've turned the cameras off, so it's now just
Oh.
us. So the prologue is the third person.
Right.
In the first
Oh.
chapter, it starts first person, and there's nothing but first person after that. Now, first person, it's told in the first person, but I, the author, am using limited omniscience. There's also something where I forget the name. But there's a fictional technique where it's told in the first person, but the author doesn't know anything except what the character says.
Mhm.
So you never have the thoughts, like I thought.
The third, what I would call the third person, or the outside, whatever
No,
the author's, whatever you call the author's voice.
Right. Well, the author always has the perspective, but the third person is only when the author is saying she and he. It has to be
Oh, okay.
she and he.
I'm calling the third person outside of the interaction that Susan's having with herself and
Yeah,
thinking, and all the thinking.
yeah.
Okay,
Anyway.
so I'm going to get those straight.
Yeah. Well, please get the book, read it, and tell me. We'll have a discussion.
Well, it's pretty traumatic. It's a pretty traumatic reading to just start with.
Right,
The prologue, and how it just so, I can see how people are thinking that have been through some very weird, strange, and traumatic experiences. And I can relate to that up to a point, just because I've talked to patients who talk like that.
Right. But
You know.
the thing with the novel is, and I should have gotten into it more, but time is limited, is that this morphs. So it starts as a kind of a thriller, and it morphs into what I would call, for lack of a better term, a woman's book. It's all about pregnancy and about giving birth and about creating a family from
I object to that, Lyn.
what?
That's towards the end, but there's the whole middle section, which I found delightful, where you have all those interaction between people who are motivated by a kind of, I would call charitable love, I don't know,
Yeah.
which I think is wonderful.
Right.
That's the part that I like better than the beginning and the end, because it gives interhuman relationships, which are very rich and I think that's what I like.
That's great. I think it's so funny because I love that you love the middle, because that's you have a beginning, a middle, and end. And some people love the beginning, and some people love the end, and you're the first person that's loved the middle. So, because people who love the beginning and the end, they find the middle draggy or something. I mean,
Oh no, but it's so rich in interaction and
Thank you. Yeah, I like the middle too. But it's part of what I was semi-intentionally trying to do, is to have the first part, which is really the prologue and sort of trails off, is trauma. And not just current trauma, but past trauma. And then the middle section is, as you say, is like she's with people that she likes and comes to love, and they're very quirky people, and she develops this connection with them, and it's all kind of normal with this undercurrent or threat in the background. And then in the final section, it's all about resolution and I wrote a different ending for the novel, and then, as I told you, I think, and it started out with two men that raped her, and then became one, and then at the very end, I had a thing where where the policeman tracked down the two guys and he told their superior or whatever, and they were fired from their jobs or whatever. And it was very
Mm.
unsatisfactory. So I'm very happy with the ending. It's a little bit, a novel is kind of a little bit like you paint yourself into a corner and you want to have it be the best corner you can. So anyway, thank you for showing up.
Thank you. Thank you.
It was wonderful. Finally. Okay. Thanks, Courtney. Thanks for being there and appreciate it. And Laureen, thanks for coming so quickly.
I'm sorry for the telephone calls in between, but I can't help
Oh,
it.
well, that's all right. Take care. See you.
Thank you.